Shalom everyone, and thanks for joining me in learning Parashat Kdoshim. Parashat Kdoshim, which means holiness or sanctity, really brings the question, what is the meaning of holiness? How can we achieve holiness? What does it mean to live a holy life? What is the true meaning of Kadosh, of holy? So the Torah says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor," and Hashem says to Moshe, Daber el kol adat bnei Israel, speak to the entire Jewish people, all of them. Ve'amarta alehem, and you shall tell them, Kdoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy. Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem, because I am holy, and therefore you should be holy. Now, when you look at this verse, obviously a few things comes to mind. For example, we see el kol adat bnei Israel. This commandment was basically conveyed for the entire Jewish people. And then Hashem says to Moshe, everyone should be holy, which seems to be that everyone can reach that level of holiness. But there are no directions of how to do it. There is no guidelines of what do I need to do in order to be Kadosh. And then the requirement of being holy, it's due to the fact that God is holy, so He demands of us to do the same. So by being holy, you achieve in a way two things. A, you fulfill a commandment. B, you imitate God. So let's try to delve into the issue of how do you achieve holiness? What does it mean? And is there any difference between becoming holy as an individual and becoming holy as a nation? So Rashi, the 11th century French commentator, one of the most famous ones, says the following. Kdoshim tihiyu, what does it mean you shall be holy? Hevu prushim min ha'arayot umin ha'avira. To be kadosh means to avoid as much as you can arayot, which will be sexual, inappropriate behavior, sexual behavior, v'mina avera, and from any other transgressions and sins. Why? Shekol makom she'ata motze geder erva, because every time that you see that the Torah and then later on the rabbis try to create some kind of a fence in order to avoid inappropriate sexual behavior, ata motze kedusha, so there you find also holiness and sanctity. So let's try to understand what Rashi is telling us. So Rashi is telling us that basically this commandment of being holy, it does not mean that you need to add any other stringencies on you. You just need to follow what God says and follow all the restrictions, the limits, the boundaries that God placed, and then later on the rabbis placed in halacha, in Jewish law, and especially when it comes to a sexual behavior which is inappropriate, arayot. And therefore, in order to be kadosh, it means muvdal, separate. You need to separate yourself from those, let's call it physical attractions, and just to do what God is telling you to do. That's according to Rashi. So if we would pause here and just ask ourselves, is that something that we can accomplish? It's challenging, but nevertheless, it can be accomplished. You just follow the laws, you try not to commit too many sins, and then you can fulfill the mitzvah of Kdoshim tihiyu, the commandment of you shall be holy. However, the Ramban, Nachmanides, does not like Rashi's interpretation. He says, Kdoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy. Hevu prushim min ha'arayot umin ha'avera, shekol makom she'ata motze geder erva, ata motze kedusha, leshon Rashi. So he quotes Rashi. But then he says, Aval betorat kohanim, this is a midrash, what we call midrashei halacha, says ראיתי, I saw, סתם פרושים תהיו, וכן שנו שם, והתקדישתם והייתם קדושים, you shall sanctify yourself and you will be holy, כי קדוש אני, because I'm holy, כשם שאני קדוש, כך תהיו אתם קדושים, כשם שאני פרוש, כך תהיו אתם פרושים. The Ramban, Nachmanides, says that he saw in a different midrash that says something little different than Rashi. He says that Kadosh and Parush are two different things. It says, Kdoshim tihiyu, v'hitkadishtem v'hitem kdoshim, you shall sanctify yourself and you will be holy, because I am holy, A. B, you should also be Parush, which means you will sometimes be separate, you try to avoid something. So therefore the Ramban says, just one second. Rashi says the word Kadosh means muvdal, separate. But it seems to be that according to this midrash, you have two requirements. To be Kadosh, to be holy, and to be separate, which means to be holy does not mean to be separate. So what does it mean? Says the Ramban, ולפי דעתי, אין הפרישות הזו לפרוש מן האריות כדברי הרב. It says, according to my opinion, this commandment, this requirement, this demand, this divine demand to be holy and to separate ourselves from different things does not really talk about an inappropriate sexual behavior, but rather, הפרישות היא המוזכרת בכל מקום בתלמוד, שבעליה נקראים פרושים. It says rather, it relates to any other situation, mitzvah, way of life, that if you avoid doing too much of it, you are considered parush, you are considered holy and separate. Such as, והעניין, כי התורה הזהירה באריות ובמאכלים אסורים, והתירה הביאה איש באשתו, ואכילת הבשר והיין. It says, if you look at the Torah says that what? That you can marry, you should have a wife. If you want to eat meat and wine, you can eat meat and wine. There are certain things that you cannot eat, but there are many other things that you can eat. There are many women that you cannot have as your wife, but you can have a lot of women that can be your wife. You cannot eat every meat and drink every wine, but there are many types of meat and many types of wine that you can eat and drink. So what's the point? Says the Ramban, אם כן ימצא בעל התאווה מקום להיות שטוף בזימת אשתו או נשיו הרבות, ולהיות בסובי יין בזוללי בשר למו, וידבר כרצונו בכל הנבלות שלא הוזכר איסור זה בתורה. והנה יהיה נבל ברשות התורה. This is one of the most famous Ramban interpretations to the Torah, which means, and I'm going to explain. It says, the Torah says, for example, these are the animals that you cannot eat. Okay, there is a list of types of meat I cannot eat. I cannot eat a pig, I cannot eat a camel, okay, whatever. Then I have a list of animals that I can eat. Now, the Torah does not say how much meat I can eat every day. The Torah does not say anything about the quantity of the meat that I can eat every hour. Nothing. If you eat meat, this is the list that you should go to. Those are the animals. That's what you can have. Which means, I can use the Torah's permission and in a way go against the Torah. What does it mean? It's to be, like the Ramban says, naval birshut HaTorah, which means an evil person with the permission of the Torah. What does that mean? Because the Torah did not tell me and did not instruct me how much meat I can eat and how frequent I can eat meat, I can sit all day long and instead of learning together, we will eat meat. and I will eat meat today, and I will eat meat tomorrow, and I will eat meat in the morning, and in the afternoon, and in the evening. And all day long, I will just eat meat. Do I do anything wrong? Not necessarily. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't steal anything. I just not involved in anything else besides eating meat. Obviously, I'm just picking on an example. And therefore, the Ramban says, this is what the Torah says to us, Kdoshim tihiyu, which means even in things and in items in mitzvot that I, the Torah, allowed you to do, you need to restrict yourself. You need to sometimes avoid doing something. Don't overdo it. Try to restrict yourself. A person can be married to his wife and spend all day long with his wife. And even though it's allowed, it's not exactly what the Torah wants you to do. Which means what the Ramban is saying, and we will need to analyze this Ramban really hard because we need to understand what exactly he's trying to tell us. But basically, what he's trying to tell us now at first glance is even things that you are allowed to do, you need to find a way to restrict yourself. So we now see a very clear distinction between Ramban and Rashi. Rashi spoke about things that you are prohibited to do and you are attracted to do. So when I come to tell you, Kdoshim tihiyu, that you need to be holy and separate, it means that you need to take an extra restriction in order not to violate a negative commandment. According to the Ramban, I'm not talking about the negative commandments. I'm talking about the things that you are allowed to do. And even then, you need to restrict yourself. So he continues. לפיכך, בא הכתוב, אחרי שפירט האיסורים שאסר אותם לגמרי, וציווה בדבר כללי שנהיה פרושים מן המותרות. He says, after the Torah basically specified all the things that we are not allowed to do, and now we are having a list of things that we are allowed to do, the Torah comes along and gives us what he called like tzivui klali, like a general principle is even things that you are allowed to do, be careful. In moderation. Restrict yourself. Don't eat meat all day long. So then he says, שנהיה פרושים מן המותרות ימעט במשגל כעניין שאמרו שלא יהיו תלמידי חכמים מצויים אצל נשותיהם כתרנגולים ולא ישמש אלא כפי הצריך בקיום המצווה ממנו ויקדש עצמו מן היין במיעוטו כמו שקרא הכתוב הנזיר קדוש ויזכור הרעות הנזכרות ממנו בנוח ובלוט. He says, for example, I will just take one example, wine. You are allowed to drink wine. Make kiddush with wine. Make havdalah with wine. Make a bracha on a glass of wine when you are officiating a wedding, when you do sheva brachot, when you are in a brit milah, when you want to celebrate something, but don't drink wine all day long. Remember, the wine can lead you to a destruction. You remember what happened with Noach? He left the ark. After he brought the sacrifices, he drank wine. He was drunk and was disrespected. Lot was drunk, slept with his first daughter and then with his second daughter. So remember, even though I allowed you to drink wine and I didn't restrict it, I'm asking you, each one of us, to know that we need to stop and restrict ourselves and not just to drink wine because it's mutar, because it is allowed. וכן יפריש עצמו מן הטומאה, אף על פי שלא הוזהרנו ממנה בתורה, כמו שהזכירו בגדי עם הארץ מדרס לפרושים. Says the Ramban, you also need to be careful not getting impure. Now, hold on here, we need to explain it. The Torah says that if someone became impure, there is a process of purification to come from impure to pure. But the Torah does not tell us that you cannot get impure. You cannot become tameh. The Torah just describes that if you become tameh, if you become impure, this is the process for the purification. The Ramban says you need to do whatever you can in order not even to become impure. וכמו שנקרא נזיר קדוש, and like the Nazir, the Nazirite is considered as a kadosh, as a holy person, even though it's only according to one opinion, בשומרו מטומאת המת גם כן, וגם ישמור פיו ולשונו מתגאל בריבוי האכילה הגיסה ומן הדיבור הנמאס, כעניין שהזכיר הכתוב בישעיהו in Isaiah, וכל פה דובר נבלה, which means don't use your language, use a proper language, don't curse, don't use inappropriate language, even though in the Torah there is no commandment that you cannot curse, that you cannot say bad things, or to use language in a bad way. But that's what I expect of you to do. So the Ramban expands this idea of Kdoshim Tiyu to the entire Torah. Very much unlike Rashi. And then he continues and he says, ויקדש עצמו בזה עד שיגיע לפרישות, and you should do it on a daily basis. Always try to restrict yourself from even things that you are allowed to do, and that will help you to reach this level of prishut, this level of holiness. כמו שאמרו על רבי חייא, like they said in the Talmud on Rabbi Xiya, he was at the time of Rabbi in the 2nd century. He says, שלא סח שיחה בטלה מימיו. He never spoke anything idle. He always spoke in words of Torah. וכיוצא בהן באה המצווה הזאת הכללית אחרי שפירט כל העבירות שהן אסורות, לגמרי עד שייכנס בכלל זאת הצוואה הנקיות בידיו ובגופו. So he says that the Torah, after they finish specifying and detailing all the things that you are not allowed to do, so the opening statement for everything that you are allowed to do is what? Need to be holy. Now I'm going to give you a permission to do many things. But even then, I'm expecting you to restrict yourself. To the extent, which is incredible, the Ramban brings the Talmud in, the Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Brachot that says, והתקדשתם אלו מים ראשונים והייתם קדושים אלו מים אחרונים כי קדוש זה שמן ערב. Which means that והתקדשתם, and you shall sanctify yourself, is washing your hands before you eat bread. Then you wash your hands again after the meal before benching if you need. And you need to clean your hands. So even cleanliness is not just for the sake of hygiene, it's for the sake of a mitzvah. And then he continues, יזהיר שנהיה נקיים וטהורים ופרושים מהמון בני אדם שהם מלכלכים עצמם במותרות ובכיעורים. He says, that requirement, this commandment, that we should be stringent with ourselves even in things that we are allowed to do, and even to be super clean, it's because we are not like anyone else. We understand that restrictions applies even in things that we are allowed to do. And then he says, וזה דרך התורה, and this is the way of the Torah, לפרוט ולכלול בכיוצא בזה. כי אחרי הזהרת פרטי הדינים בכל משא ומתן של בני אדם לא תגנוב ולא תגזול ולא תנו, ושאר האזהרות אמר בכלל ועשית הישר והטוב. The Ramban tried to substantiate his opinion and he says, this is the way of the Torah. The Torah gives you the details, what you are allowed to do, what you are not allowed to do, and then comes the expectation. For example, after the Torah says that you shall not steal, that you shall not, I will call it deceive people. So after the Torah is very specified of what you are not allowed to do, then the Torah says in a very general way, and you shall do what is right and just in the eyes of God. You just told me what I can do and what I cannot do. Answer, says Ramban, there is an extra expectation. Yeah, this is what we call din, the law, and then there is lifnim mishurat adin. There is what we call beyond the letter of the law. something that I expect you to do because I have expectation from you. וזה שיכניס בעשה היושר וההשוויה וכל לפנים משורת הדין לרצון חברו כאשר הפרש בהגיעי למקומו ברצון השם. Says the Ramban, basically if I take the Ramban and I try to summarize it, I know it's a lot, but let's summarize it and make it clear regarding Rashi versus Ramban. Rashi looked at the commandment of Kdoshim Tiyu. You should see there is one chet especially, a specific sin, that is very attractive one, which is a sexual behavior which according to the Torah is inappropriate. Therefore, there are sexual behaviors that are totally inappropriate. Then there are sexual behaviors which are appropriate. However, says Rashi, I know I told you not to do the inappropriate sexual behavior, but now I'm expecting you and I'm asking you to please put on yourself some restrictions in order not to violate it. So basically Rashi says, whatever else that you are allowed to do, if you don't want to do them, you are not kadosh, you are not holy, you decided not to do it. If you want to be called holy, you need to really be very careful, be very strong regarding inappropriate sexual behaviors. Rashi. Ramban, for him, it's not sufficient. Kdoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy. It's a general principle in Judaism. It doesn't talk about what you cannot do. It talks about what you can do. But even in the realm of possibilities, which means even in the realm of what you can do, I, Hashem, expect of you to restrict yourself. Not to do things just because they are allowed without any accountability. In a way, the idea of holiness is not in the realm of what you cannot do. The things that you are not allowed to do is because God says you cannot do them. The idea of Kdoshim Tiyu depends on you doing things that are not formally prohibited, but that they can lead to something else or to show a tremendous self-discipline that you can avoid things that you are even allowed to do, but you don't want to do them. So, obviously, the Ramban expands and extends this idea of Kdoshim Tiyu and makes it almost like a principle hovering over the Torah that in everything that you are allowed to do, you need to hear this, you shall be holy. And even in business and transactions, even though you are not stealing anything, even though you are not deceiving anyone, you always need to remember ve'asita yashar ve'atov, that you shall do what is right and just, even though you are not, by law, you are not required to do it. So, if you pause here and you ask yourself, okay, so how can I implement it in my life? So according to Rashi, it's pretty obvious, especially when it comes to inappropriate sexual behaviors, you need to be very careful not to get close to it. According to Ramban, this is a given. There is no question that you need to do it. I am talking about restricting yourself even in things that you are allowed to do. It's interesting that the Ramban takes one of his examples is the Nazir, the Nazirite, who obviously cannot drink wine. And the Ramban calls him Kadosh, holy, because he basically took upon himself not to drink something that is allowed. I would say, and I need to be honest, this example is a bit complicated because according to a Tana in the Talmud, the Nazir is called a sinner. And why? Because you are allowed to drink wine and you take upon yourself not to drink wine, you are basically saying, I don't want to enjoy something that God gave me. Now, why am I saying and why am I discussing with you this example? Because what the Ramban says, it's something that we need to discuss. And we really need to think about it. If God said something is allowed, Why should I restrict myself from it? What, do I need to find ways to make my life harder? Isn't that enough that I follow what I can do and I follow what I cannot do? Do I need to add more restrictions and stringencies? And only by doing so, then I will become holy? This is a major question in Judaism. Are we in favor of adding restrictions and stringencies we don't have enough? Or we do say that in order to show love and passion towards our religion, yes, even in things that you are allowed to do, you need to restrict yourself to show your devotion. Do you show your devotion by doing things, or you show your devotion by refraining from doing things? And I'm talking only about things that we are allowed to do. This is a major question. So let's leave that question, something to think about, and let's see Rav Yonatan Eibeshitz. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz says the following. אמנם כבר פירשתי, כי להחמיר יותר מתוך התורה הוא אפשרות רחוקה. He says, to add more stringencies, what the Torah does not tell you to do, it's too much. כי כבר כתב יוסיפון בן גוריון, יוספוס פלביוס, ג'וסיפוס, בספרו לרומים, when he wrote his book, Josephus Flavius wrote his book and he gave it to the Romans, he said in one of the descriptions, he says, שהיו בבית שני אנשים שהיו שוכנים ביערים מתבודדים. He describes some people, a group of people, that basically isolated themselves and dwelled in a forest by themselves. וממש לא אכלו רק פרי עצי היער. They will eat only fruits from the trees. והיו נזירים מכל ענייני העולם, and they didn't enjoy, they didn't touch anything. אבל הפרושים לא נחה דעתם בהם כלל וכלל. The Prushim, which is a name for the rabbis at the time of the Second Temple, which what we will call today the Orthodox rabbis, they did not like those groups who isolated themselves in the forests. Why? כי עובד השם השלם צריך להיות דבריו ועסקיו נוח להשם ולבריות, ולא להפריע נימוס יישוב העולם וחברת בני אדם והנהגת מדינה. This is an incredible saying. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz, עובד השם השלם, someone who calls himself God's servant, needs to understand that he cannot focus only on one part of Judaism, the spiritual one, and to totally be detached from society. You can't. Oved Hashem HaShalem, someone who is a true God servant, understand how to balance between spiritual realm and the physical realm. How we can be immersed in Torah and engage with society. How not to do things that are being perceived as weird, strange, odd, but rather to be part of society and even to lead society with morality, with ethics, with devotion to God. ואילו היו כולם נזירים כאלה, and if everyone would be a nazir, because it's such a wonderful thing, לא נתקיים נימוס וסדר הטבע, ויכלה העולם ויאבד קשר האומה. The entire universe will be destroyed. If everyone will start basically preventing himself from doing everything, this world will not be able to be maintained. ועל זה רמזו חז"ל, and this is the idea that our sages try to hint at to us, יפה תורה עם דרך ארץ. You want to be a really God servant? Torah, it should come with derech eretz. What is derech eretz? Derech eretz is not only just to be a mensch. Derech eretz means what? An occupation, doing something, being engaged with society. This idea of separation, only Torah and not work or other things, just it's not what it should be according to Rav Yonatan Eibeshitz. You need to merge the two realms, the two worlds, the two ideas of spirituality, of Torah, of God, and society, marketplace, it needs to come together. They need to intertwine. Now, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz is not naive. He does not give us a formula. Okay, 4 hours Torah learning, 4 hours marketplace, 2 hours family, 1 hour friends. There is no one formula that fits all. Every person, it's upon him and her to try to balance their day. How can they devote time to Torah learning, to be scholars, to immerse in this beautiful Torah that we received, but at the same time not to forget their obligation to society? ולכן כל הפרישות שיעשה האדם תהיה על זה הסוג, שיש אפשרות שתקיים אותה כל האומה. Meaning every person should take upon himself some kind of restrictions that can maintain this balance. אבל הפרישות שאפשרית רק ליחיד ולא לאומה בכללה, זה אינו בגדר השלמות. It says if you take upon yourself things that only an individual can take upon himself, and it doesn't fit to the entire nation, this is not the prishut. This is not the holiness we are looking for. ודברים כאלה הרחיקו חכמי ישראל. וזה כוונת המדרש פרשה זו נאמרה בהקהל. The Midrash says that this commandment of Kdoshim tihiyu, that you shall be holy, was said in front of the entire Jewish people. That's what we saw. El kol adat bnei Israel, to the entire Jewish people. Why? כי הקדושה במותר לך תהיה רק מה ששייך בהקהל. Which means, if you want to take upon yourself some kind of extra holiness, you need to ask yourself, can everyone else do the same? And if the answer is no, don't do it. According to Rav Yonatan Eibeshitz, in a way he agrees with the Ramban that Kedusha means to avoid or to prevent yourself from even doing things that you are allowed. However, when you do that, you need to ask yourself an essential question. Would that stringency, this restriction, will create a separation between you and society, the Jewish people? Would that create some kind of a gap and a distinction between the spiritual realm, the Torah realm, and the societal realm? And would that distinction, that stringency, is something that others can do as well, or they can't? And only after you went through this process of questioning yourself, then you can answer yourself if you can take this stringency or you cannot. What Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz says, it's something that we definitely really need to think about a bit. The idea of avoiding things that you are allowed to do because of the concern that you can abuse a permission. And that was the Ramban's concern. I'm allowed to eat meat, so I can eat meat all day long, and my entire day will just be about what kind of meat I'm going to eat next hour. And obviously, I'm not going to be productive. So obviously, you need to have some restrictions. We all understand it. We all understand that even things that are not considered as not allowed, which are prohibited and not considered as allowed, or the Torah did not talk about it, for example, cursing. So obviously, we understand in order to have a nice society, you shouldn't curse. But the idea is, according to Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz, holiness is something that can intertwine, can merge the spiritual world and the physical world together, which obviously has tremendous ramifications. The next opinion is the Seforno. Rabbi Ovadia Seforno, who lived in Italy in the 16th century, gave a different insight. It says, דבר אל כל עדת בני ישראל, speak to the entire Jewish people, קדושים תהיו, you should be holy. אחרי שישרה שכינתו בישראל לקדשם לחיי עולם, כמו שאמרו, שהייתה הכוונה באומרו, ואתם תהיו לי ממלכת כהנים וגוי קדוש. So after God dwelled, or basically put his divine presence among the Jewish people, and he told them that you shall be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. ובאומרו, and when he says, כי אני השם המעלה אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוקים, והייתם קדושים, and when he says to the Jewish people, I am the God who took you out from Egypt, to be a God upon you, and you shall be holy. והבדילה מטומאות המאכלות והזרע, בטומאת הנידה והנגעים הנמשכים ממנה, ומטומאות הזיווה וטומאת החטאים, כאומרו מכל חטאותיכם לפני השם תתארו. So after we saw in the Parashot before, that God warned us about all the kind of impurities and all kind of food that we should not eat. ומחברת השדים ורוח הטומאה ומטומאת האריות, כאומרו אל תטמאו בכל אלו. So after God gave us a list, upon lists of things that we shouldn't do, we cannot do, we are prohibited from doing. So now, אמתה שהכוונה בכל אלה האזהרות היא שיהיו קדושים. He says now, the commandment קדושים to you is not necessarily only a commandment, it's an explanation. You know why I told you not to contaminate yourself and not to eat things that you should not eat? It's because that will lead you to Kdoshim Tihiyu. Now this is unbelievable. If Rashi says that you should avoid something that it's not allowed, and that's the idea of Kdoshim, according to Seforno, by not doing something that I'm not allowed to do, that considered already as me becoming Kadosh. וזה כדי שידמו ליוצרם כפי האפשר. And that's in order to what? To make them as similar as they can to their creator. כמו שהייתה הכוונה בבריאת האדם, כאומרו נעשה אדם בצלמנו כדמותנו. וזה ביראתה באומרו כי קדוש אני השם אלוקיכם. By fulfilling the negative commandments, which means by not doing them, you become similar to God. You become Kadosh. Because all the things that you are not allowed to do, it's not because God just doesn't like us and he says, oh, you shouldn't eat this type of meat or the other type of meat. It's because that by not doing so, you purify yourself. You become holy. You become like your creator. וראוי שתדמו אליי כפי האפשר בעיון ובמעשה, ולהשיג זה ההידמות באר שנצטרך לשמור את המצוות הכתובות בלוח הראשון, שכל הכוונה בהם היא לחיי עולם בלבד, כמו שבאר בסופם, למען יאריכון ימיך. Basically he says, this idea of all the things that you are not allowed to do, it's for our own sake to become holy. So now we have almost 4 different opinions. Rashi, prevent yourself from inappropriate sexual behavior, because when you do, there you can find Kedusha. Ramban, prevent yourself from things that you are allowed to do, as much as you can, and that will show your devotion, your passion, your commitment to holiness. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz, Ramban is correct, but you need to be very careful that your restrictions, that the Kedusha that you take upon yourself, do not lead to a separation between you and society. Seforno says no. Just keep the negative commandments. You will become holy. Don't look for any other stringencies. Don't look for any other chumrot, stringencies. Don't look for any other additional mitzvot to put upon yourself. Just do what you were asked, and the Kedusha is a built-in into the negative commandments. You're not going to steal, you're not going to murder, you're not going to deceive, you're not going to do to worship idols. Every negative commandment adds, enrich your holiness. You don't need to do anything else. Just do what you are told. So we have 4 different opinions to the idea of holiness. And we will conclude with the Natziv. The Natziv, Rab Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, suggested the following idea. הקדים הכתוב כאן אל כל עדת בני ישראל. If you look at the verse, if you remember the verse, it says, דבר אל כל עדת בני ישראל. Meaning the opening statement of the verse was, speak to the entire Jewish people. Why? Says the נציב, באשר אין פרישת כל אדם שווה. It says, everyone is different. You are not like me, I'm not like you. Does not mean that you are better than me, does not mean that I'm better than you. We are all different. ותורת כל אחד לבדו בידו, לפי טבע גופו והליכות ביתו. And everyone is not only different, the way we behave is very different. The things that we are attracted to is very different. For example, if you tell a vegan, don't eat too much meat, he will look at you and say, I don't eat meat at all. Okay? If you tell someone, stop drinking wine all day long, and he looks at you and says, wine? I don't even like wine. So if I tell someone who does not like wine, you are a kadosh. Why? Because you don't drink too much wine. It's because he doesn't like it, not because he likes it and he wants to restrict himself. So therefore, and then you have some rough people who can use bad language, and you have very gentle, nice, delicate people who will never use bad language. So therefore, says the Natziv, the opening statement for the commandment Kdoshim Tiyu takes into consideration the variety of people. משום מה הכתיב, דמכל מקום הכל מוזהרים איש לפי אורכו, מה שאין כן כל המצוות, הדבר ידוע שהכל שווים. The Ramban, in a way, he agrees with the Ramban, but he has some disagreement as well, which means, he says, when it comes to the mitzvot, to God's commandments, everyone is equal. Everyone can do it. I don't care if you are vegan, if you like wine or you don't like wine. Everyone is equal. When it comes to the negative commandments, also everyone is equal. So what does it mean to be holy? This is what I will call a very subjective commandment. Each one of us needs to think, what is the extra step I can take upon myself that will enrich my life with holiness? What kind of an act of kindness I can do in order to enrich my life with kindness? Things that are not written in the Torah, necessarily. Or even things that I'm allowed to do, but, I don't need to do it. According to the Natziv, which is very interesting, there is what I will call, just for the sake of our conversation, some kind of an autonomy for every individual to choose for him or her a path of Kedusha, of holiness. And if we know a little bit Jewish communities and Jewish people, we know that, some people, for them, holiness is through a song. Some people, holiness, they can achieve through kindness. Some people achieve holiness through extra Torah learning. And some people achieve holiness through fighting in the army, doing other things, volunteering in the hospitals. It's subjective. There are mitzvot that are for everyone. There are negative commandments that are for everyone. And then there is this little subjectivity, some kind of being independent in my own religion to basically choose a path that I think will add and will enrich my life with Kedusha, with holiness. Yes, Kedusha means some kind of separation, a separation from not other people necessarily, a separation for something that I like to do, some kind of self-discipline. Even in an act of kindness, I think there is Kedusha. Because if I give something to someone, I give something of my own, something that belongs to me. I give it to someone else. I separate myself from it because of someone else's need. The idea of Kedusha is not to have two wings like an angel. The idea of Kedusha, of holiness, is to find it in our day-to-day lives, in our interaction with people, in our behavior. So now, we don't have one answer to what does it mean to be Kadosh. We have few of them. And I invite you to ask yourself, what did we do today in order to be a bit more holier? Thank you.